Good morning on what is a cool, grey and slightly damp day. It is Monday the 25th of July. I have a nice hot cup of tea. And a parcel to unbox. So, let's get this one open. Typical, pull the tag and it cut. And it's that again. Little things, just like that. So let's get my finger in there and okay. What we have is a copy of Slaying the Dragon, a secret history of Dungeons and Dragons by Ben Riggs. On which there's a lot of praise for on the back here, but let's just, this is what I'll really tell you what the book is about. Role-playing game historian Ben Riggs unveils the secret history of TSR, how the company that unleashed imaginations with Dungeons and Dragons was driven into ruin by disastrous management decisions and then saved by its bitterest rival. So this is essentially, there are several histories of role-playing and several histories of Dungeons and Dragons available for you to read. Playing at the World is probably the most well-known by John Peterson, and John Peterson has also written another book called Game Wizards, which charts the history of TSR from its foundation in 1974 all the way through up to 1985, so essentially its first 12 years of history. And done so really through the rivalry between the co-creators of Dungeons and Dragons, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, and how that influenced the path and future of the company, and ultimately combined with management decisions, it would end in Gygax being ousted from the company himself. 1985 in the infamous showdown at the Sheraton Hotel. Now you can read all about that in Game Wizards. It's a really good read. The question is, what happened next? What happens next when Lorraine Williams comes in and saves the company back in 1985, together with the Blooms, and forges a great future for the company until, as we all know, TSR is bought out by Wizards of the Coast in 1997. This book covers that 12-year period, and it's a really good read. Because I have read this, I do actually have a copy. That I've already done a review, so by the time you've seen this, it'll be linked down below. It begins really with a really nice piece of artwork. We have this tarot card, this tarot card here with the last dragon there, and then at the very end, we have it flipped. So you've got the first dragon. So really, that's a really nice addition there. It's really the only piece of artwork in the book. But it sort of captures that feeling of it, sort of like the two halves of the company, TSR and management, essentially under Gygax and Williams. Pretty much essentially as this book is the counterpart to Game Wizards. What's surprising about the read through it is just discovering how bad the management decisions were for TSR throughout this period, how fundamentally it would throw introductory box set at the hobby again and again to try and entice new players into the field, whether that was First Quest or Dragon Strike. Which you have to remember, but they were actually really kind of innovative at the time, because Dragon Strike attempted to do role-playing for 8-year-olds and basically teach the game via VHS. Pretty much like things like Atmosphere did, and those kind of games did in the period. But along comes First Quest sort of 2 or 3 years later, and that taught the game to a teenage audience, and did it via a CD, and actually pretty good. So it was trying to do different types of media, and it was innovating in terms of its settings. So Planescape could be seen to sort of like Many of the Planes combined with the factionalism of settings like Vampire the Masquerade. Dark Sun was a role-playing game sort of like that was in part built up around Brom's artwork, which is fantastic and really signature to that game. But all those settings, that too many coming out and not selling enough, and not treating its staff, and TSR not treating its staff right. So we begin really sort of like at the beginning, essentially the prelude to this book, to this story, because obviously we are dealing with Lorraine Williams' reign, is the rise and fall of Gary Gygax, because she comes in at the end of his story, and this gives a potted history, a guide to what happens, in dealing sort of like with Satan, suicide, and sales, and that's an important combination. The combination of the moral panic of the early 80s, the disappearance of James Dallas Egbert III in the late 70s, and then his subsequent suicide, all gave TSR a huge amount of media attention and fueled sales, because, what was this new game? It was forbidden fruit. Parents and churches objected to it, but yet, the kids wanted to play it. I'm pretty lucky. I grew up during that period, and being British meant we didn't face that moral panic. It's sort of like, you just thought, what's role playing? It's that weird thing that nerds do, and that was it. There was no backlash against it. Now, included throughout, we do have the occasional sales table like that. Now, there aren't too many of these actually. So it's not it's sort of like a detailed financial history at TSR, although that does sort of like figure into it. And it's not a so much a sort of like a document-driven account as in Game Wizards. It's much more anecdotal. Documentation does feature and play important roles, but primarily it's anecdotal. It's talking to the people involved and getting their stories. Now, there are a couple of people in the book who are mentioned numerous times. Of course, one of them is Lorraine Williams, and unfortunately Ben Riggs was not able to get an interview with her, so it doesn't give her side of the story, and I think that's unfortunate. But that's not his fault. She declined to give an interview. And so we get to D&D and living basically the rise and fall of Gary Gygax, part 2. We get onto the Williams era, and this is when she comes in, guarantees the future of TSR and also Dungeons and Dragons. Let's face it, in 1985, 1986, she saved Dungeons and Dragons from TSR going out of business. Now, the irony, of course, is that she would ultimately put the company and all that intellectual property in the same boat. So it does start off with sympathy with Lorraine, and she deserves it. And then we've got a section upon Lost Realms. Obviously, that's the introduction of the Forgotten Realms. The new setting which would replace Greyhawk with the leaving of Gygax. We get on to the development of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition. And even we have the next section here on the saga of TSR West, which is interesting. Basically the TSR's decision to try and move into the comics market, and that didn't play out very well, partly because the products are a bit old, and competing in a big market where you also had DC and Marvel. and yeah, and many of those products are sort of like are poorly remembered now. And again, we talk about the fish bait strategy, which is essentially what, attempting to sort of like throw sort of like lots of options, i.e., bait, into the water to see what bit, i.e., what the hobby bit at this content, and whether that includes sort of like the Buck Rogers role playing game, which kind of nobody really wanted, and the numerous settings for Dungeons and Dragons, Ravenloft, Planescape, Dark Sun, Red Steel, Space Jammer, and so on. Some of which the hobby today is sort of clamouring for. Definitely Planescape, definitely Dark Sun. They're very fondly remembered. So yeah. Then we have the appearance of R.A. Salvatore, and his influence upon the company, and just how he drove his just best-selling books helped the company. And then part 3 is slapping Band-Aid on the failures, and this is really, we're getting onto the depths, to the ultimate downfall. It's charting sort of like the downward course of the failure. It's accruing of debt and so on. So there's an interesting. There are some. There is some kind of photographs, and they're nicely done, but they're not desperately. I wouldn't say they were necessarily all that interesting or particularly relevant to the story as such. The inclusion of some of the artwork, Brom's artwork, of course, is because he played a big role in the company, during the 90s. And then, so I'll just see, there is one really interesting section in here. I'm going to see if I can find it, because where are we? Bear with me a second. And then, yeah, just. There's a fascinating chapter in here called TSR and Tolkien, the Game That Was Not. And this chapter actually explores what could have been an advanced Dungeons and Dragons game based in Middle-earth. That would have been really fascinating to look at, essentially down another Trouser leg of time. That you go back, sort of like you go back to the early days of Dungeons and Dragons, and with the stakeholders, with film rights essentially objecting to the use of the term Hobbit in Dungeons and Dragons. That's why we have Halfling. But then, literally, to have the film rights sort of like to say, oh, we'd like you to do a role-playing game, and TSR going, yes, we'd like to do that, and then, of course, it's scuppered by mismanagement decision that we won't want the whole thing. Okay, we don't just want to do the role-playing game. We want to do new fiction set in Middle-earth, and that's, you kind of go, really? You want more fiction in Middle-earth, which is, it seems just a ridiculous claim and almost sort of like sacrilege, if you will. So yeah. It wouldn't be until the event that you get Adventures in Middle-earth from Cubicle 7 in 2016, where you would actually have that melding of Dungeons and Dragons and Tolkien in official capacity. So yeah. So then we have we basically get down to the deal that saved D&D. And how that came about, essentially the last part of Preacher's Son, which is Peter Atkinson, coming in to save the company, having made an incredible amount of money at Wizards of the Coast, with the rise of magic, and buying the whole thing out, and really. Basically just saving not just TSR in a day, but also the whole of Dungeons and Dragons, and essentially the rest is history, because that's 1997. 2-3 years later, we have a new edition, a third edition, and so on. Wizards of the Coast is a huge company. It's still the in control of the biggest role-playing game in the world, and it's even bigger. And here we have his section, the last section, is healing the wounds, which is really sort of like looking at the change in management, the change in tone from the Williams era to the Atkinson era, and looking forward to the future of the game in 97 back then. I would essentially I would thoroughly recommend this. It's a fascinating read of the last years of TSR, and how essentially all those creatives got lots and lots of things right, even as management got them wrong. They put out great stuff despite the decisions that management made, and this is a really good read. So yeah, that's Slaying the Dragon: A Secret History of Dungeons and Dragons by Ben Riggs. If you've not seen it, you've not read it yet, I thoroughly recommend it. So thanks again for watching another unboxing of the Nook. If you've enjoyed this, then please do click on the like button down below, and of course if you've got any comments or feedback, I appreciate you taking the time to post those. And lastly, if you want to be alerted to yet more unboxings in the Nook, where you'll see me out here with a box and a book or a game which I will unbox and chat about to the best extent of my knowledge, all of course accompanied by a nice hot cup of tea, then please do hit that subscribe button. Thanks again for watching, and I'll be back again soon with another unboxing of the Nook. Bye for now.